I wonder if you could speak to a fear that people have on this topic of artists, engineers, fear losing their jobs, being replaced by AI. Are there words of hope that you could offer them?
This is certainly the most extreme example of it because AI is just so far ahead of prior technologies, but similar fears were had in every other industry. There's a fear that digital music synthesis would obsolete musicians. And there's a very brief period of time in which songs with digital music instruments, like the early Mini Moogs and Yamaha synthesizers, weren't
Yeah.
allowed to win certain music industry awards because they weren't considered real music. Um, and then, over time, the people were educated and realized, oh, these are just instruments people are playing, and they're controlling them the same way they did before. There's similar questions about is computer art built in Photoshop really art, or is it just goofy computer stuff? And I think nowadays digital artists have gained respect. And I think if you look at just the tools that have existed in Photoshop, some of them are pretty sophisticated. And nowadays they have AI features, but I think AI is ultimately going to be another tool in the artist's tool set. And I think it's going to become a more powerful, directable, and human-serving tool in the future. And I think a lot of the alienation comes from the prompt either being immensely powerful at giving you an entire creation, but then being completely unwilling to let you control the nuances of it. That feels alienating. You give it an image, but you're like, you know, replace the image of replace this part of it with this thing, or make that object green, and it just like it can't do it. Often it can't be convinced with any number of words in the
Yeah.
prompt, and that makes it feel like the computer is taking control away from
Yeah.
us, humans and artists, and is refusing to do what we want and has its own opinions. Right? It feels like a competitor. Where I think when we have much, much, much more nuanced control of it, and artists can go in and just, like, let's enhance this object, do this, do that, do that. They'll feel it's like some of the tools that exist in Photoshop, which are in some ways compared to a paintbrush are superpowers already. AI will come to feel like that too, and will increasingly serve creators creating and enhancing a work in a way that feels just a natural extension of their own bodies and minds.
And of course, there is a real human pain to layoffs, and there is a hype around AI, and then companies might try to implement AI systems, and in so doing, lay off a bunch of folks, and that the pain that those folks feel is real. I think there's always going to be pain with these kinds of transformation that's happening, and it's a terrible pain. Pain in general in the human experience is terrible. But I think I'm personally excited by the human AI collaboration as you've described in this whole process. So I think if you just keep being open to using the tools, constantly trying the cutting edge tools, how they can make you more productive, how can they empower you as a creator, as an artist, or as an engineer, uh, I think you're going to just keep winning.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of complicated trends underway, and it can be hard to break them down and distinguish them. I think a lot of people like the theories that get the biggest traction on social media often don't capture the real underlying motive forces at play there. But yeah, I think AI involved in code production will probably create a net benefit for the need for humanity to be involved in coding. It may change parts of jobs. I don't think it's going to obsolete anybody who's willing to learn new ways of doing things. And it's always been this way. And I think that there's also a lot of overhype in AI. AI is really great at spewing out code that does something that a million GitHub repositories already do because it's kind of learned the underlying pattern. It's notoriously hard to get to do something new. It hasn't been done before, especially when it's a complex task. And the bigger amount of code you ask AI for, the more it leaves you with just a massive code that sort of works, right? And that's the problem with code. It like 99% works, but the 1% it might be harder to get to 100% with AI than with hand coding. And everybody who's looking at this topic should actually try using the coding assistants on hard problems and see how they do there.
Yeah, I think for me personally, it makes it more fun and faster to generate boilerplate code. So I can focus on the harder decisions, harder big picture decisions, and harder innovative decisions, and all that kind of stuff. And just makes programming more fun for me because I feel less lonely.
Yeah.
I have like even when it gives the wrong code, I can like, oh, okay, well, that's a way to do it. That's interesting. And then you could talk to it. Uh, maybe
Yeah.
that shows something about the programming experience, that it is in part sometimes a bit lonely.
The topic of boilerplate code is an interesting one because, like, the mere existence of boilerplate code is a failure of programming language and of the idea of creating software modules, right? You know, you ask AI to create a sorting function, great. Now you have another sorting function that might be buggy alongside the million others that different people have written. It would be better to have a sorting function that's been written and tested and optimized and everybody relies on it. And more modular software, I think, will actually reduce the opportunity of AI because people doing programming work will largely be solving unique problems. They're actually hard problems in themselves and not just connecting other widgets.
Yeah, I think as in many cases, AI will just help improve the human systems by shining a mirror to ourselves.